If Game of Thrones Season 9 were to happen, it would need to borrow an idea that George R.R. Martin himself once considered. Because Game of Thrones' ending was so controversial, and the show so huge generally, then the idea of it being brought back and continuing some way remains a pertinent one, even years after the series finale. Is it likely? No. But is it plausible? Yes. In a world where HBO has multiple Game of Thrones spin-offs planned, WB might make a movie set in Westeros too. A Lord of the Rings film set during Fellowship with Aragorn and Gandalf is in the works, and there's a Harry Potter TV remake on the way, so it definitely could happen. Nothing is sacred, just about everything is viable for a reboot, revival, remake, or reimagining, and so if the powers that be decided to revisit Westeros with Game of Thrones Season 9, it wouldn't be a shock. That doesn't mean it's a good idea, but that's how business works. And if it were to happen, which, hopefully, would involve a lot of the cast and crew coming back, otherwise there's really no point, then it needs one plot device to work. GRM Scrap Time Jump explained. There was almost a 5-year gap when Martin was working on the follow-up to A Storm of Swords. He originally planned to skip the story ahead by 5 years. A Song of Ice and Fire's time jump would have mostly served the purpose of aging up the book's younger characters. Jon Snow was just 14 when the story started, Daenerys Targaryen was 13, and the likes of Arya and Bran Stark younger still. The author felt they weren't old enough for the even darker, more mature stories he had planned for them, and the time jump was his fix for that. This would have also marked a new direction for the story, because A Storm of Swords changed things so radically. With Tywin Lannister dead, Tyrion Lannister and Arya both headed to Essos, Robb and Catelyn Stark killed at the Red Wedding, Joffrey Baratheon murdered at his own wedding, and then Catelyn coming back as Lady Stoneheart, to mention just a few game-changing plot lines. The status quo was irrevocably changed, so there is some logic to having more reaching room between events. However, Martin ultimately scrapped the time jump, because it provided more problems than solutions. The author found himself writing that 5 years had passed at the Wall, following Jon Snow becoming Lord Commander, and hardly anything of note had happened. Other stories had the opposite issue, too much had happened, and he was bogged down in writing flashbacks to explain it. So, instead, there was no time jump, and Martin ended up writing the versions of A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons we have now. Why a time jump is the only way to make Game of Thrones Season 9 work. It makes sense after Thrones series finale. Although Game of Thrones is now a long way past the point of Martin's time jump idea, it's one that would actually be better suited to the story and characters for Season 9. That's not just to help with Game of Thrones cast, which isn't too much of an issue, so it's only been a few years, but more because if the show were to return, the passage of time would be important in finding a new narrative. For one thing, the ending of Game of Thrones Season 8 was pretty definitive. That's true of the major characters, but even more so the state of the 7 kingdoms of Westeros as a whole. So many major houses are extinct, so many people dead, and so many wars and rivalries over that it needs time for things to rebuild. This is Westeros, after all. There'll always be some new threat, a new reason for houses to go to war, and new quests for power, but it can't happen so quickly after crowning a new king, or a new queen in the north, and so on.